The Many Times Peter Parker Shocked Midtown by WreckItRiley. Chapter 6. The Avengers. The students of Midtown spent the rest of the day in whatever departments they hadn't seen with Peter, and managed to ask a barrage of questions. Then, at 5 o'clock, they put in their requests for where to intern the next day, and were shown to the guest rooms they would be staying at. At 6:30 sharp, they were told that dinner was almost ready, and to please enter the elevator so Friday could take them upstairs. The group was a bundle of nervous energy at the prospect of meeting the Avengers. Thankfully, the elevator stopped and picked Peter up along the way. The teens felt more at ease with Parker acting as a buffer, despite how worn out he seemed. His peers asked him how the rest of his day was, and Parker shrugged and answered that it was good, but long. The elevator kept moving upwards, and when the doors opened into a huge futuristic-looking room, the first thing the teens saw was Tony Stark running at them, with an angry-looking Pepper Potts on his heels. Stark threw himself behind Peter and tried to use him as a human shield, completely ignoring the rest of the people around him as he whined. "Peter, Pep's being mean to me." He grabbed the boy's shoulder and ducked as Pepper stood in front of them both. Her stern expression had faded when she noticed the other students, but her eyebrow was still ticking with irritation. However, Peter spoke up before she had to. "Tony, you brought this upon yourself, and any sympathy I would have had for you disappeared after the third meeting I had to attend for you today." By this point, Peter had turned around and put a hand on Stark's shoulder so he couldn't flee. He somehow managed to look irritated, disappointed, and exhausted at once, and Stark seemed to realise his mistake. "Okay, I'm sorry I dumped this on you, but it wasn't intentional, I swear." "You're not that sorry, Tony. If you really hate board meetings that much, just ask for me to go for you instead of weaseling your way out, okay?" The teen patted his shoulder before speaking to the students behind him. "Come on, guys, I'll introduce you to the team." The group stepped around Stark as Pepper grabbed his arm and pulled him to the side. As they rounded the corner, they still managed to hear the start of her speech. "I cannot believe you. Peter works himself to the ground every day, and you go and dump not only your work, but Bruce's on him as well. You owe that boy big time for today. We could have lost both the Tokyo and Swedish investments if he hadn't stepped up. And on top of that..." The rest was lost to the group as they found themselves face to face with the Avengers. In casual clothes and lounging around the room in what was the most domestic scene the group could have imagined. Hawkeye and the Falcon were playing Mario Kart, while Thor and Black Widow watched. Captain America was cooking dinner, chatting with the Winter Soldier and Dr. Bruce Banner. Vision and the Scarlet Witch were sitting off to the side discussing a book, and War Machine stood chatting on his phone. The Midtown group stopped short, unsure of how to proceed, but Peter just walked straight into the kitchen, ducking under the captain's arm to snag a mouthful of sauce before announcing, "Guys, these are the kids from my school I told you about." He looked around the room and pointed his finger at a few different Avengers before continuing, "Be nice." They received a chorus of "Hays" and a few lazy waves from all but Thor, who stood and walked towards the starstruck teenagers with a large grin. "It's nice to meet some of Peter's friends. Hello, young Midgardians," Thor said with a smile. The group of kids stood frozen for a moment before greeting the god with a chorus of small hellos. The giant's grin widened as he got a mischievous gleam in his eyes, but as he opened his mouth to speak, Peter stepped up next to him and physically pushed the god a few steps. "I literally just told you to be nice," Parker said, with a glare at the Norseman. Thor simply looked down at Peter innocently. "I don't know what you mean, my young friend," Thor said shamelessly. "That whole I don't understand your customs and fake innocent shtick might work with everyone else, but I know your brother isn't the only god of mischief," Parker said with a small glare towards the large man. Thor simply shrugged unconcerned before smiling at the group of teens again. Peter shoved him once more with a grin and led the teens into the lounge room. From there, the evening was a bit of a blur. They all took turns playing video games against literal superheroes. They were given permission by all of them to use first names, and the group relaxed a bit and started chatting with a few of their idols. It was surprisingly chill. Sam and Clint bantered with each other, and any students that were game to join in. Natasha and Thor told them watered-down stories of some cool missions and adventures. A few teens migrated to the kitchen and spoke with the super soldiers and Bruce. Then Wanda and Vision joined, and they both got questioned extensively, not that they minded. Rhodey finished his call and joined the teens in video games, much to their delight. Mr. Stark came back, with Ms. Potts behind him, and immediately told all the students to call him Tony unless they want to get kicked out of the building, which led to Peter calling him Mr. Stark for the rest of the night, to the amusement of everyone but Tony. Dinner was delicious, and the group complimented Steve, making him blush with a smile, causing most of the girls to blush in turn, which Parker found hilarious. All in all, the evening was amazing, and something out of a dream for the group of students. Even Mrs. Levering, the physics teacher who had chaperoned, had fun. After they'd all eaten and cleared the table, it was decided that they would all watch a movie together. Peter, Bruce and Tony tried to excuse themselves to get work done, but were told by Steve that they either stayed by choice or force. Tony and Bruce sat down immediately, not wanting a repeat of earlier. But Peter looked at Steve with a smirk, and they seemed to size each other up for a moment, before Steve slumped and wordlessly pointed at Thor, who grinned menacingly. Parker stood silent as he narrowed his eyes at the god, seeming like he was deciding what his chances of winning were. Over the night, Midtown students had gained first-hand knowledge at how close Peter was with all the heroes. They really were like family, and Thor seemed to be like an older brother. Still, there was no way Parker could win against Thor, even in a play fight, they thought, amused at the stare-off. "I'm the god of thunder, young Peter. Do you really stand a chance?" the large man said in a low voice. Maybe not. But don't forget who you're talking to, big guy," Parker responded, his voice equally low but playful as he sat next to Thor and swung his legs onto the older man's. "And who would that be precisely?" Thor asked with a smile as he draped his arm around the teen. Peter smirked up at him as he leant against his side. "Oh, many things, but mostly, please remember, I'm Friday's favourite," Peter said with a sickly sweet smile as Thor's face paled. The rest of the heroes snorted as Tony denied it. Excuse you, kid, I made her." "Sorry, boss, but if I had to choose a favourite, Peter would most certainly win," the AI interjected in her gentle Irish voice. Tony looked sullen as Pepper laughed and patted his arm. "Yeah, let's not forget the last time you pissed off the kid," Sam started with a grimace. The group of teens looked at Peter questioningly as he sunk into the couch. "Thor ate my Pop-Tarts," Parker stated like he'd explained everything. "Yes, and you had Friday zap me every time I touched something metal," Thor said in a sulky voice. "You ate my Pop-Tarts 3 days in a row," Peter responded. Darkly, the god put up his hands placatingly. "And I'll never do that again," he said quickly. Peter grinned and quipped back, "You know, for a god who plays with lightning, you're not very resistant to electricity." "How did you even do that? It goes against her programming," Tony asked, bewildered. "I may or may not have hacked into the servers and changed a few things," Parker replied with a shrug. Everyone stared at him for a few moments before Clint spoke. "You scare me sometimes, kid," he said, shaking his head. "Yeah, note to self, never piss off Peter," Sam agreed, and Rhodey snorted. "You guys have no idea. Last time Tones banned him from the lab, he had Friday play vines at him every 5 minutes. Took him 2 days to figure out what he'd done and reverse it." "Yeah, and I changed the entire system, made sure he couldn't do it again, and yet he did it again," Tony stated, narrowing his eyes at Parker, who simply shrugged. "Please never turn to the dark side, Peter," said a voice, and they all turned to see Ned and Michelle exit the elevator and head over to the couch. They were greeted warmly by the group, and it struck the students then that Ned and Michelle have known the Avengers for a while. especially when they sit next to Clint and Natasha and exchange fist bumps. "So, what movie are we watching, losers?" Michelle asks, and from the room dissolves into a debate about what genre to choose. They ended up watching some new release movie that wasn't out of the cinemas yet, and it was halfway done before the group of teens noticed that Peter had fallen asleep on Thor. The god had pulled a blanket around the teen, and it was an adorable sight. They also noticed that Tony and Bruce were eyeing the sleeping teenager with slightly guilty expressions. Once the movie ended, Thor gently shook Peter awake, and the two said their goodnights as everyone started to make a move towards bed. "Shit, that deadline for robotics was due today," Tony suddenly broke in as he stretched. "Relax, I got it done," Peter replied sleepily, patting Tony's cheek as he stumbled past and into the elevator, while leaning heavily against Thor. "God, I love that kid," Tony said. Pepper poked him in the ribs as they both walked out of the lounge. "Then stop making him clean up your messes," the group heard before the doors closed behind them. The rest of the Avengers bid the Midtown group goodnight, and soon they were shuffling into the guest rooms they'd been left. Ned and MJ got into the elevator with them and ended up in guest rooms on the same floor. The teenagers quickly realised that they weren't tired at all after such an exciting day and decided to stay up and discuss all the craziness that had happened. Ned and MJ, amazingly, were happy to answer questions, which quickly turned into a sleepover in the lounge room on a guest floor. The two wouldn't say much that the group didn't already know, but it was nice to have a little clarity, and to assure that the last 12 hours hadn't been some vivid hallucinations. They stayed up chatting for a few hours before Ned looked to the ceiling and spoke. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Have a lovely rest of your day.